the birth experience did not go at all how I was expecting, but it was such a testament to how God works in all things and how he provides, even in some of the most challenging times of my life. And I hope that this will be encouraging to you as well. Hey friend, I'm Kaylin. I'm a nutrition scientist, I'm a wife, a mom, and I'm passionate about the intersection between the physical and the spiritual. I'm all about holistic health and helping you understand how to take care of your body better and live a more fulfilling and abundant life. Today's video is a little bit different from the past videos on my channel. They've been primarily about food, nutrition, how to heal from various health issues, specifically my own story of how I healed my acne. But this video has been on my mind and my heart for a long time, and I've been wanting to share it with you. And so today I'm kind of just jumping out on a limb and I'm going to be sharing with you my birth story. If you're interested in birth and babies and all of that stuff, you are welcome here. And if you just want to hear my story, I'm happy that you're here too. I genuinely became obsessed with birth stories as I was leading up to becoming a mom. It's kind of like a rite of passage. It's like a way that we share these stories with each other as women that helps us feel not so alone. It helps us to relate maybe with pieces of each other's stories. And it's very helpful, especially as a first-time mom, when you're not sure what to expect, to just hear all kinds of different stories and prepare yourself for this huge life event, this sort of threshold that you walk through when you become a mom. And so, yeah, this is just something that's been on my heart for a while. We just hit the 1-year mark since I gave birth to our son, Ezra. He is a little 1-year-old and is the most fun thing ever. It's such a joy getting to experience his life and watching him grow and develop and, become this little person with a personality, and just to see who he's becoming and to get to be a part of that. It's so much fun, and it's such a blessing to have a little baby. Motherhood is not for the faint of heart, but it's one of the most rewarding things that you can do as a woman. And yeah, so I just kind of want to share my testimony of what God has done in my life through becoming a mother and through my very unexpected and kind of wild birth story. It's kind of hilarious to me now. It's almost comical when I think back at all of the things that occurred, how it all happened, and how God was working in all of it. Even when I didn't understand or see how it was all connecting, God was with me through it all. And I hope that this is encouraging to you if you have also experienced maybe an unexpected or even traumatic birth of your own, or even just working through an unrelated trauma in your life. There are things in my story that will apply to anyone, no matter what your experience. And I think these are important things to talk about. And also, I think it was helpful for me when I was pregnant to hear a lot of different types of birth stories so that I was prepared for, anything could happen. We can plan in our hearts, we can dream, we can hope, but we can not predict the future. We can't control the outcome. And so I think it can be helpful, especially for people who maybe like me struggle with a desire for a sense of control, and maybe you struggle with surrender. There's a lot of that in my story. So I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So grab a cup of tea or coffee or something, get cozy. Yeah. So let's get into it. So I grew up kind of afraid of birth. I had this sort of image in my mind that birth was a scary sort of alien experience where you kind of lose control over your body and you don't really know what's happening to you. And birth is like this medical emergency, in the hospital, and it's sort of violent and disturbing in a way. I had all these sort of formed preconceptions in my mind, and we're all shaped by the experiences of those who came before us and the stories that we hear. My mom had very difficult pregnancies and difficult births, and that was kind of programmed into me like, oh, this is a really scary sort of like bad experience. And so there were a few times in my marriage where I thought that I might be pregnant, and that brought so much fear over me to the point where I was having panic attacks. All of these emotions were coming up, and I was realizing, oh my gosh, like I'm not ready to be a mom. I had all of these fears and doubts and realizations that I needed to work through a lot. God had to really sort of unravel those threads that were all tangled up in my mind. And so throughout the first several years of our marriage, God was doing that in me, and He was teaching me. And I would see things online from friends, and I started to do some more learning about pregnancy and birth. And suddenly I was aware that this is actually a very natural experience. It's a very completely primal, natural thing that we were created to do as human beings, as women, as mammals. Like, we are created to be able to give birth, and we've been doing it since the beginning of our history, and it is woven into our natural design. And so I started to sort of shift my mentality about birth, and I started to realize how incredible the design of our bodies is. And as I learned more about the normal physiological processes, I became less and less afraid, more excited and more interested. Like, the knowledge helped to buffer the sort of fear and anxiety of the unknown, because I was like, oh, like I see how it's all designed to work in harmony and create this beautiful system that is ultimately, results in a baby. While I was becoming less afraid of birth and pregnancy, I was also becoming less afraid of motherhood. I had to work through thoughts. We're all exposed to this culture that kind of sends us the message that when you become a mom, you suddenly become less worthy as a person, or you start to lose yourself, and you start to become kind of a victim or a martyr, or disappearing kind of and losing who you were once you become a mom. And I really had to wrestle with those thoughts at the same time. I had to break those down and realize that those were not actually true or life-giving. There was actually so much beauty in motherhood, and actually it only adds to and enriches the person that you are. It becomes a part of who you are, but it doesn't encompass you entirely, right? And there's actually something so beautiful about the sacrifice, physical and emotional and all of those things. And there's so much joy in it. There's so much joy that it's worth any hardship or pain that is often temporary. God was unraveling my fears in many different ways. So over time, my thoughts sort of shifted from like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this, to I think I might be ready for this soon, to like, okay, God, I'm ready to have a child whenever is your timing. And so it was kind of a powerful progression in my heart to where I felt like, okay, I'm ready. And God gave me specific visions during that time, where one of them that stands out to me was I was just kind of sitting and spending time with God, and I got this mental picture of standing on a cliff over the ocean and wanting to jump into the water, but I looked down and I saw fins sticking out of the water and circling. Like, there were what I thought were sharks swimming in the water below me. What I didn't realize was that although I thought they were sharks, they were actually dolphins. And God spoke to me and said, you're focusing so much on what might go wrong, and you're so afraid that you haven't stopped to consider how beautiful it would be to swim with dolphins. And just saying, like, you just need to jump. You just need to take a leap of faith. And you have no idea how beautiful and rewarding and special this will be if you just jump and trust me to catch you. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful. I was not prepared to get emotional. um, it was just this beautiful and kind image that spoke so deeply to me about how I often look at things from a place of fear. I often worry. I'm often stuck in anxiety, and I'm just thinking about, yeah, what if this goes wrong? What if something bad happens? And Jesus, in his kindness, wants me to experience my life fully, wants to show me how beautiful it can be and how much joy I can have if I just surrender and jump and just trust that everything's in his hands. And so that's just a little like glimpse into what God was doing in my heart. And hopefully that's an encouraging word for you as well. So I realized it was time to jump. I realized it was time to start the next chapter of our lives. So as I waited, hoping to conceive a baby, I was very proactive about my health as I am. I read a lot and I prepared as much as possible. I read, I researched, I listened to podcasts, I watched videos, I created spreadsheets measuring out all of my nutrient intakes. And I knew how important a mother's health is to the health of her pregnancy and the health of her baby. It's incredibly important to take care of your own health and nourish yourself because that is what will affect your baby's future and their development and everything. And so I read books like Real Food for Pregnancy, which is amazing. Recommend all of Lily Nichols' work. It's so helpful for the pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, like time period. And I tend to be an overthinker. I tend to struggle with OCD. And that's been something that I've dealt with since I was a child. And it's something that I had to work through during this process. So I had to balance my desire to do everything possible in order to achieve the perfect outcome with my surrender and knowing that actually nothing outside of my own choices is within my control. I cannot control the outcome. I cannot create this baby. That is something that God does within me. And there was so much surrender, so much working through that. After a few months, I conceived Ezra, and I knew that I was pregnant before I took the test. I just felt different. I had some really unique cramping that I'm pretty sure was implantation. And so it was really exciting. And even the morning that I took the test, I woke up at 3 a.m. or something, just smiling with a smile on my face. And I knew that something was different. It was so strange. It was a crazy experience. I found out that I was pregnant and I was so excited. I had vivid dreams about him being a boy. So I also knew that he was a boy before we found out. And the first trimester was exciting and emotional and also hard because I did experience sickness and it was not fun. It wasn't extreme, but definitely consistent experiences of nausea and getting sick. So that was definitely not my favorite time. But after the first trimester, things leveled out and I had a pretty uneventful pregnancy, I would say. Pretty healthy, pretty normal. We got our anatomy scan and he looked healthy. There was really nothing too crazy. I was really thankful that things seemed to be progressing normally. I had actually chosen our midwife a year before. We had interviewed her a year before I got pregnant. As I said, I can sometimes be an extreme planner. But it was just I knew that this was going to be the season that we were moving into. And so I wanted to just kind of start figuring out who I might like to work with when the time came. And I had wanted to do a home birth. That's what I planned on. After doing so much research, excessive amounts of research, it just became something that I was really actually excited about, which was a big deal. That I had progressed to the point of being excited about giving birth. I loved the idea of doing it in my own home where I was comfortable, where I could be as relaxed as possible and to avoid the stress of, being in a hospital where it's not really set up to really support natural physiological birth. It's not really set up to be the most comfortable place for a mom who is in such a vulnerable state. And my plan was to be as limited intervention as possible, as hands-off as possible, and just let my body do what God created it to do. I felt comfortable with my team. I had a great experienced midwife who, she comes with medical equipment and she has supplies and plans in case of emergency. So I was very supported and it wasn't going to be a free birth or anything like that. It was medically, supervised and I felt really good. Our appointments with our midwife were so nice. They were hour-long appointments. We could talk about anything, do whatever testing that we wanted to do. Really just, I felt so cared for, and it was such a much nicer experience than, going to the doctor's office and waiting a really long time and then having like a quick 5-minute appointment where you feel like you're not really heard. They don't really have the time maybe to give you. And so that's kind of some of the reasoning why I wanted to have a home birth. I kind of kept it to myself as much as possible. I definitely got some weird looks. People thought I was a little crazy, but it was what I felt comfortable with. And it was, I felt safe with it. And I knew that if there was some sort of emergency or change of plans, that we would be able to transfer, and we had a plan in place and everything. And so that was kind of like my mindset going into it. And as I said, I prepared extensively. I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, which was so helpful. We went to a birth class, and yeah, I was like all ready to go, ready to just let my body do its thing and avoid any unnecessary interventions, as those can cause, more complications. And I was like, yeah, like I can do this. It's going to be great. But at the same time, I felt this sort of pull to be cautious or reserved. As I said, I didn't really post about it online about like my plans or anything, and I didn't talk about it unless, people were asking and interested. And I often felt led to say, I'm planning a home birth, but we'll see what happens. Even in my appointments with my midwife, I kept saying, I tend to really struggle when things don't go the way that I expect, or when I feel like I can't control a situation. But I'm trying to just hold this with open hands and just say that, like, no matter what happens, I'll be okay. I felt like prompted to not speak too negatively or in fear-based terms about the hospital, because I thought, if something does happen, I don't want to be like freaking out if I need to go into the hospital, and I don't want to be afraid of that place. I don't want to be anxious. Even if my plans have to change, I want to be able to have peace in the middle of that. And I think all of that was the Holy Spirit working in me and preparing me for what he knew I would go through. So yeah, I was trying to be very neutral. As the birth month approached, I was in full-on nesting mode. We had our baby shower and had so much on my to-do list, and I wanted to clean our house and do a lot of preparing. I was like full-on expecting to like go long in my pregnancy, because the average time length of pregnancy for a first-time mom is, I believe, 41 weeks and 5 days or something like that. And so I was like, yep, probably 42 weeks. Just expect to go long so that you're not disappointed. And yeah, I was just kind of expecting to cook for a little while longer. So I was not ready. I had not done a lot of meal prepping or like a lot of the things that I wanted to do, because I thought I had time. Lesson learned. I started getting my first stretch marks on my belly around like 35 weeks, and I was like, oh, I thought I would avoid them, but I tried to have the mentality that, these are something to be proud of. They're an outward sign of your expansion into the next phase of your life, into the absolute beauty of the surrender of motherhood. They started to get a little itchy, and I didn't really think much of it. I just thought, my skin is stretching, it's kind of irritated. But as the weeks went on, it started to get more inflamed, bumpy, definitely like a rash. And I asked my mom, hey, does this look like a PUPPP rash? And that's PUPP, which stands for Prophetic Urticarial Papules and Plaques of Pregnancy, which is just a beautiful name, isn't it? But it's basically a rash that can develop during pregnancy, and it's kind of rare. And my mom confirmed, she said, yeah, that looks like it could be what I had when I was pregnant with you. And I was like, dang it. It was so itchy. It was rough, and it was only getting worse. It's difficult to describe how excruciating this itching was over, it was only like a period of a few weeks, but it felt like an eternity. Imagine your blood or your bones are itching and you can't scratch the itch away. Like, it's just like boiling inside of you. And I felt like I was going crazy. I was starting to like have like mini breakdowns, and it was like psychologically tormenting. And, I would put my feet in ice baths and put ice packs on me when I was trying to sleep. The rash was spreading down my legs and onto my arms, and it was crazy. Truly, I was miserable. I remember joking like, hey, maybe this part is so bad that it'll make birth seem easy by comparison. And it's kind of hilarious that I said that. So I had no idea. At like a little baby shower dinner celebration I was having with some girlfriends, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and she was telling me about how she had symptoms of cholestasis in her pregnancy. And she was talking about specifically like itching on her hands and feet. And we had that conversation. And I think this was all a part of God's plan, that we had even talked about it and it was in my mind and on my radar. And so one night I was in the middle of the night, I was awake and I was itchy. I started to just really have this sense of like, maybe I should get tested for this. Maybe I should just check and make sure that things are okay, because I was starting to get, I was feeling itching, all over, but like on my hands and feet also sometimes. And so I was like, well, that is a symptom. So maybe I should just get checked. And I was like, I was nervous because I was like, I don't want to bother my midwife. I don't want to be like that person and be all anxious. But Eric, my husband, reminded me like, that's what they're there for. Don't be afraid if you are worried to just bring concerns up, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So I asked her to run a liver panel and a bile acids test, and she was like, yeah, we can do that. And so I got my lab work done, and my levels were a bit high, within like the normal range, but a bit high. They were about 9.1 micromoles per liter. I believe that's the unit of measurement. So my midwife was like, let's test again, because we just want to keep an eye on this. And I was like, okay, like, I need to figure out how to combat this. So my mom took me to the store, and I was buying a bunch of liver supportive things, dandelion tea and tinctures and stuff like that. Cause I was like, okay, well, I want to like nip this in the bud if there's like an issue, and I want to support my body with whatever it needs. So a couple days later, I got the results back from the next draw. My bile acid levels were at a 12.5. And so the threshold for diagnosis of cholestasis is 10. And so I was just over. She was like, all right, so officially this is cholestasis. Let's get your labs done again. And then we were also trying to figure out if we should take any other steps. I believe I was nearing 39 weeks at this point. So quick pause. If you're unfamiliar with cholestasis, it is a relatively rare condition that can develop during pregnancy. It's still not fully understood, but the theories of how this works in the body is that it's a combination of genetic factors, so genetic mutations, as well as the impacts of pregnancy hormones on the body. And so this combination in some individuals can make them more likely to develop this condition during pregnancy. The word is made up of the Greek chola, meaning bile, and stasis, meaning standing or stoppage. So the stoppage or slowing of bile essentially is what this is. So normally the liver produces bile, which is then stored in the gallbladder and flows out into the intestines to help emulsify and digest fats. It's a big part of our digestion and also detoxification processes. However, in this case, the normal flow of bile becomes slow and sluggish, and the liver is not functioning quite as efficiently as it should. And so this causes those bile acids to not flow freely as they should, but to build up in the tissues of the liver and eventually to spill over into the bloodstream. And so the bile acids are now flowing in the mother's bloodstream, and they can rise quite quickly, even without warning. This can cause those symptoms like itching in the mom. Also, like some other signs like yellowing of the skin, jaundice, liver pain, things like that. I didn't really have any other symptoms other than the itching. The condition isn't really dangerous to the mother. The main concern is that those bile acids can actually cause damage to the placenta, and they can hinder the flow of oxygen to the baby, and even the bile acids could even cross through the placenta and cause damage to the baby. The most concerning possible effects of cholestasis with high levels is stillbirth. And so it's a very serious condition that is not to be taken lightly. And so we were suddenly in this mode of like, okay, what is this? What do we do? Doing all this reading to figure out, like, grapple with this new information. The official title is Intrahepatic Cholestasis of Pregnancy. So this is what I had. So that day, October 11th, was crazy. My mom took me to do some more labs because I had just crossed the threshold. So we were keeping an eye on my levels. But even in the middle of that, I had so many sweet moments. There was this older lady in the lobby of the LabCorp, and she was asking me when I was due, and she was saying, "Oh, when I was pregnant, I had a basketball belly like you." And she told me how she was a retired nurse and she used to fall asleep in bed with a stethoscope trying to listen to her baby. When she was pregnant, she had to go on bed rest for a long time, and she was telling me how hard it was, but she realized that, her career would always be there, but this baby that she didn't want to lose wouldn't always be in her womb, and so it was worth taking the time to do what she needed to do to keep her baby safe. And she told me she was a Christian and her friends would come and pray with her and encourage her, and it was just so sweet. And I just think that all of these little moments were God speaking to me and encouraging me along this path that I was blindly walking down, not knowing what was going on. That day was crazy. My husband he had multiple video shoots. So he was working and we were on the phone with our midwife just talking through everything. And she was like, cholestasis, I have only had, in 10 years or so of doing this, I've only had like one. I don't have a lot of experience dealing with this, but I would take it very seriously. She said it even concerns her more than preeclampsia because of the danger to the baby. And so she was like, if you're still experiencing the itching, it might be worth going into the hospital and just getting some testing done, getting a second opinion. So we were like going back and forth, like, what should we do? Eventually we decided, let's just go in and just see what they say. We were frantically trying to pack a hospital bag and prepare, and our house was in shambles. My mom came over and bless her heart, she was helping us to clean everything. And then one of our dear friends came over, brought us dinner, and then she ended up helping my mom clean. It was so kind. And I was like, Eric, grab the camera just in case, but like, we're probably coming right back home. We're probably just gonna go get some tests done and then just come home and like, it's gonna be fine. But just in case, like, grab the camera. And I was like kind of in denial, but like deep down in my intuition, I knew that we weren't gonna be coming right back. I just had this feeling, and I just remember like just like losing it for a second, just letting myself cry and just feel like absolutely overwhelmed. And then I was just like, okay, let's do this. We're gonna go. So printed out a bunch of papers to get all my documentation in order since I'd been working with a midwife, showed up at the hospital and made it into triage around 10 p.m. Friday night. They got me set up with a non-stress test, and a series of nurses came in to talk with me and do protocol stuff, ask questions. They did an ultrasound to check Ezra's position and check for dilation, which I was not dilated. I was not ready to go into labor. It wasn't time yet. But ultimately, after considering all the factors, they came in and they said, with your condition, we would recommend induction. And so it was this crazy moment where I was like, this is the last thing that I had wanted. I had said for so long, like, I do not want an induction. I've heard so many horror stories of inductions. There are good experiences too, but I just knew that with the interventions that inductions bring, there can be that series of the snowball of interventions, which causes more complications and can end up in worse outcomes. And so I really didn't want that. I really wanted to just let my baby come when he was ready. But, we called our midwife again, and we were just going over everything, and we just felt like everyone was affirming that this was the right choice and advising us that this is what they would do. And so we were like, we should be wise and we shouldn't just fight against this just because this isn't what we want. If it's true that there's some concern for our baby, like if it's time for him to come out, then it's time. And I was also, at that point I was so tired of the itching, and like I was really stressed out, and my body was just not handling things well. And so there was that like psychological factor too, that it's like, it seems like it's time. And so that was a really hard call to make, but we just felt like, all right, we're going down this really like alternate path now, and we just have to trust God. But I still felt his peace with me, and there were so many things that happened that were just signs that he was with us. One of our family members had worked at that hospital at the time, and she didn't have shifts super often, but she happened to be there. So she was our first nurse that took us in and got us set up in our room and everything. It was so comforting to just have a familiar face and a person that we knew. And she was so amazing and took such good care of us. And it was so reassuring to have her there. And the staff overall was great. And that was huge too, because that can really make or break your experience, depending on how supportive your staff is, because there are some experiences that people have had that are truly, truly sad, and people that shouldn't be working in hospitals. And thankfully, I really had a good experience, and I was so thankful for that. When the nurses heard that I'd been planning a home birth, they were so compassionate, and they were saying, just write out your birth preferences and we'll do everything we can to make the experience like as close to what you had wanted as we can. And they were so encouraging and so like respecting of my autonomy. And so that was really amazing. And every time they came in to talk to us and give us recommendations, they were very respectful, just sharing information with us and then ultimately leaving the decision up to me. And so I felt like that really helped me in the process, feel like I was in the driver's seat and I was able to respond with decisions rather than just having decisions made for me. And I think that all of the research that I had done, even like on hospital policies and things, helped me to be prepared for what to expect, what to ask for, and things like that. So if you want like more of that sort of, I can make like a separate video about all of that. But this is for now just, focusing on my story because I don't want this video to be like 3 hours long. So anyway, it felt like we were in triage for hours, which we were. It felt like forever. Finally got checked into a room around 3 a.m. And I had been experiencing like intermittent Braxton Hicks contractions, but nothing serious up to that point. And so they did a dose of Cervidil, which helps to ripen the cervix for labor, and we tried to get some sleep. It felt like we had entered like this dream state of reality. Eric and I were like, is this really happening? Like, are we dreaming? Like, what's going on? It was so trippy. And I'll never forget that night hearing the sound of a baby crying somewhere in the unit. And I felt so emotional. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to hear my own baby cry soon. Like, I'm going to meet my baby. This is crazy. And I also heard like some wails of mothers in labor, and that was a little intimidating because I was like, oh my gosh, like what is this gonna be like for me? I don't know what to expect. It was a little scary, but it was like just okay, like this is happening. I just felt like I was like clicked onto like another mode of myself, and I was able to not focus too much on what I had planned on or what I had wanted, and just able to make decisions as they came, which was good. Yeah, we got a few hours of sleep super early that morning, and then we woke up and had some food. Thankfully, family members brought food for me too, which was nice. We had some visitors to just check on us. This was so early in an induction process that, I just was having the cervical ripening, so there wasn't a lot going on yet, and it was pretty chill. I was really focusing on just like relaxing and eating and resting as much as possible because I knew that there was going to be a lot of work to come. And so our doula came. Side note, I had been like on the fence about having a doula or not. And another thing that just ended up so perfect, I'm so glad we did. I highly recommend having a doula, someone who can be a knowledgeable, experienced person to support you during your labor is so invaluable. Ours became a dear friend. She was praying for me. She was reading scripture for me and serving me in ways that I hadn't even anticipated that I would want or need, like before, during, and after my birth. She was really a godsend. And so she brought things to help make the hospital room feel more cozy and homey. We put up twinkle lights all around the room and beautiful birth affirmation art cards, and she put up this crochet art piece of like the stages of dilation, and she had like essential oils and massage tools and just like different things with her that just really helped to make it such a much nicer experience. And people like would comment on it when they came into the room. They're like, this is the cutest thing like we've ever seen. I love it. And yeah, it was really special. So somewhere around 4:30 p.m. the next day, we came into the hospital late on Friday. This is Saturday evening. The Cervidil had done its job. Although we were a ways from active labor, I was 1 centimeter dilated, 30% effaced with a -4 station. So he was still cozy in there, but like things were softening up. They placed a Cook catheter to mechanically put pressure on the cervix to open things up. And the placement of that was extremely uncomfortable. It was very unpleasant. And after that, my contractions increased a bit in intensity. I started to need to kind of breathe through them and focus my energy on relaxing, and I kind of started to feel like the waves coming over me. They suggested maybe doing low-dose Pitocin at this time, but I just wanted to wait as long as possible before doing Pitocin because I was like, maybe I won't need it. I had read about how Pitocin contractions are a lot stronger than natural oxytocin contractions. Again, that can cause complications, putting the baby in distress and things like that. And so I just was like, let's hold off and just do the catheter for now. We had another night of sleep. The next morning, it was removed. I was 2 centimeters, 50% effaced, station -3. So it was, again, slow, but the process was moving. And I was prepared for this to be like a multi-day process. I knew that an induction for a first-time mom at like 39 weeks was not going to be like a quick thing. And I was fine. I wanted it to be a slow process. While I was in the hospital, I actually got the results of my bile acids. The most recent bile acids test that I had taken, my levels had jumped to 28. My liver enzymes were also significantly elevated, and so there was definitely signs of stress on my liver. So it was just kind of a reassurance that yeah, even though the levels were still low, below 40, it's really a mild case. But because things were progressing, we didn't want to risk it, and we felt affirmed in our decision that being in the hospital was the right choice. So they recommended further cervical ripening at this time. So I did Cytotec and also took Actigol or Ursodiol, which is a medication to hopefully bind up some of the toxic bile acids in the body. That day, Sunday, was pretty uneventful. I felt this sort of game time energy, but things weren't too crazy yet. But I was like, let's go. I was doing curb walking on this little step stool, and I was walking around the unit and try to just keep things moving as much as possible so that my baby would get into a good position. And I continued dosing the misoprostol or Cytotec. Contractions continued, but they kind of fizzled into really mellow, it wasn't too crazy. Sunday afternoon, I had progressed to 4 centimeters, and they talked about Pitocin and then rupturing my membranes. And I didn't want to do artificial rupture because, again, I just wanted to keep things as natural, as slow as possible. I didn't want to have any unnecessary interventions. And so I was like, okay, let's keep waiting. My mom came at this time, which was really nice. And we walked around and settled in for another night, just kind of waiting to see what would happen. So Monday is when things got crazy. I took a shower, walked around more. I was still at 4 centimeters, although 60% effaced at this point. The next stage would be Pitocin. And so I was like, okay, let's start. We started in the lowest dose in the morning. My doula brought this lovely labor robe that I put on it just really helped me feel homey and cozy and less I just have this hospital gown on. It just felt a little more enjoyable of an experience. We had worship music playing on a speaker, also the Christian hypnobirthing meditation tracks, which that was just really helpful to just keep my mind centered and was really relaxing. So one of the nurse midwives who was there at the hospital came in. She discussed my birth plan, and she did some spinning babies exercises with me, which was really nice to just loosen up my pelvic floor and get in a good position, get relaxed. Another provision of God. My original midwife was actually extremely sick during my labor, and she doesn't work alone. She would have had assistants and stuff, but she probably wouldn't have been able to support us as much as she would be normally because she was so sick. And so it was just another thing of we are well taken care of, and we were just thankful for that. So approaching noon, contractions really started to grow in intensity, and I was officially entering labor land. And this was something that really surprised me and that I had not anticipated. For all my preparation, this wasn't something I could have prepared for because I had never experienced anything like it. I felt like I entered a dream state, and I journeyed inward into myself to a point where I felt like I wasn't really there fully. I was minimally aware of things going on around me. My sense of time vanished. It was kind of like an out-of-body experience. And that was something that I guess I didn't realize what it would feel like. Looking back, I was like, oh, well, why didn't I think of this? Or why didn't I say this? But like I wasn't like fully in my brain in that moment. It's not like a logical, normal person place. It's like you are having a sort of a psychedelic experience in a way. I've never experienced that before, but I've heard that it's similar. It really is a different sort of state of being. This is also the point in which I stopped eating. I really didn't think about food after this point, but I didn't give birth until the next night. I think that's one of the things that made it difficult is that, they were definitely keeping me hydrated and keeping me drinking fluids, but going that long without food and like doing that much work grows exhausting very quickly. So it's something that I realized looking back, but I just was so out of it that I wasn't even thinking about this stuff. So like I got on the floor, like leaned over the birth ball. I just was like letting the contractions wash over me. I sang to the music. My mom and my doula combed my hair because I hadn't like done my hair or anything. They like put it into a nice braid and that felt really nice. And I felt really sleepy and relaxed at this point. And I had my labor combs. I'm pretty sure for like that whole day and a half, they were like in my hands almost nonstop, like just squeezing them so hard. I would say my favorite part of my labor was just feeling so supported and so cared for with my team there, my husband, my mom, my doula, and then the nurses as well. But like with my team, my main team who was with me, they traded off giving me massages and hip squeezes, counter pressure, and I found touch extremely comforting during this time. I know people are different. Some people are like, they just want to be alone. They don't really want to be disturbed. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I definitely benefited from just people's hands on me. It was very soothing, helped me stay relaxed. Hilariously, during this time period, I was also enrolled in college full time online. And so while I was in labor, I was asking my husband to email my professors and let them know, like, I'm going to need some extensions. I'm not going to be able to get to my homework for a little bit because I'm giving birth. So it was kind of a funny experience. So Monday night around 6:45, I was like squatting and then I suddenly felt this like strange like pop in my abdomen. I felt Ezra like wiggling down inside of me, sort of in a strange way. I felt fluid gushing. And I was like, guys, I just felt something. Stuff is coming out of me. Like something's going on. I think my water just broke. So this was like a little victory. Yes, like we did it. We got to this point. My water broke on its own. Like things are happening. That was a good moment. And then the intensity only increased from there. So I labored through the night. I was like vocalizing. It was like intense with Pitocin contractions. And I didn't want to get an epidural. So I had no pain medication. I just used the combs and, like listening to the hypnobirthing. I had a TENS unit on my back to help with, it like stimulates the muscles in your back. I was feeling increasing pressure and intensity. But I was like coping with the contractions. I remember the hypnobirthing tracks. There was like some guided prayers and they at one point led me to tears and I was just like breaking down and I really felt the presence of Jesus and it was very just a vulnerable experience. My team encouraged me to just keep moving, rotating between positions. We used the labor ball, the peanut ball, squatting. His heart rate started to get a little funky. So they were having some concerns. They would come in like a few times and had me move positions to try to get his heart rate better because it was kind of fluctuating. But they, as we did position changes, they gave me some IV fluids and it was stabilizing. So at some point they like gave me oxygen. It was really intense through that night. And I don't even remember, like I was so unaware. I don't even know if I was like falling asleep at different times. But at some point before midnight, I believe they checked me again and I was about 7 centimeters. They were like, yeah, it could be several more hours, blah, blah, blah. But then around 1 a.m., I believe I jumped to like a 9.5. 100% effaced, -1 station. I remember looking around at my mom and Eric and my doula, and they were all like reacting with excitement, like, oh my gosh, it's so good. And I kept like feeling like the process was so long that I was like, stop encouraging me. It's never gonna happen. Why do you keep saying I'm almost there? Because like this is taking so long. I just kept feeling so defeated. But each stepping stone, they were like, it's okay. Like you're getting there. You're getting farther. The doctor noticed that I had like a swollen cervical lip, so they offered some Benadryl to reduce the swelling and then IV fentanyl to help with the pain. And normally that's not really something I would have gone for, but at this point I was so tired and I think just desperate for some rest. So I was like, okay, let's do it. That was actually a really negative experience. The fentanyl did not actually help the pain, and it just made me feel super drugged, and then I had a panic attack. So it was not fun. I felt like I was stuck in a dream state. I was experiencing some pain and I was like, "Oh, mom, help me get up. I gotta move." And then I was just like pacing the room back and forth. I kept repeating that I wanted to run away. I felt trapped. Like I wanted to like escape my body. I wanted to escape this experience. I was like freaking out. And in hindsight, I think that it's because I was approaching transition. And that's often the time when your adrenaline will spike. You'll kind of feel this feeling of like, I can't do this right before it's about time for you to start pushing. They woke up Eric so he could help calm me down, and he was encouraging me, and somehow I made it through. I was like, at that point I was even asking for the epidural. I was like, I just wanted help. And they were like, well, like, let's just see like how you're doing, because you might be, progressed far enough that you don't need that. And so at some point they checked me and the cervical lip had reduced, and they were like, yeah, you're complete, like you'll be ready to push soon. So I think I rested for a little bit, and then around 6 a.m. Tuesday, I was like breathing through my contractions and trying to like allow my body to push. And like my memories of this time are so blurry. I relied a lot on what people told me and the hospital notes and everything, because I was like so unconscious for a lot of this. I was kind of trying to let my body push. This went on for like 3 hours. And then the nurse midwife came in and she did some like focused coached pushing with me, which I hadn't wanted to do, but I was like, if I'm not doing something effectively, then let's try it. And so this continued for about 6 more hours. It was crazy. Again, I don't remember a lot of it, but it was like a marathon. I remember pushing with all the strength I had. And at one point I asked, is it supposed to be this hard? Like, is this normal? They wheeled in the delivery table, and I remember feeling hope, like, oh my gosh, I must be getting close. They're getting ready. They were all cheering, encouraging me. They could see Ezra's head, and they brought in a mirror at one point so that I could watch, but I couldn't get really a good view. He was like right there, but he kept descending and then going back up, which is a normal thing, but he wasn't, progressing farther down through my pelvis. And so, I pushed in so many positions on my side, on my back, on all fours, squatting, doing like tug of war, but he was not coming. And around 3 p.m., the midwife talked to me, gently kind of updating me on the situation, was like, hey, you've been pushing for a long time now. The baby's getting a bit stressed. We're seeing some heart decels, and there's some meconium in your amniotic fluid now. His head was coning, but it wasn't like coming through fully. And because I was still only at a +1 station, they didn't recommend doing like the vacuum or anything. And so she was like, you can keep pushing, or, you can do a C-section. And it was this moment of like, man, after so long and so much hard work, it was just this crazy feeling of defeat. We asked for a moment to think about it, and they stopped the Pitocin. My contractions fizzled out. My body wasn't really doing it on its own. Everyone left, and Eric and I had a moment, and this kind of just like settled over us. And I told him, like, I can't keep pushing. If I've pushed for this long with everything I have and he's not coming out, then we need to do a C-section. And I knew that it was time to surrender. I gave it all I had. Eric was so sad for me, but I just felt numb in that moment. Like it hadn't really hit me. And I was like, this is just what has to happen now. I kind of just like accepted it. I asked to take a quick shower. They prepped me for surgery. I was so cold, and they covered me with warm blankets. And because Ezra was so low and I'd been pushing for so long, walking and moving was excruciating, like just so much pressure, and I could barely move. It makes me smile now, but I was worried that I was going to have to walk to the surgery room. I was like, am I going to have to walk? Because I don't know if I can make it. And they were like, no, you don't have to walk anywhere. Like, we're going to wheel you. It's okay. And at this point, I was just like accepting every moment with like very little resistance. I was even laughing and making jokes at this point. Like, it had not settled on me. I think it was a protective mechanism for my brain to not freak out, but also in a deeper sense, I believe the Holy Spirit was protecting me and giving me his peace. Then I said goodbye to my family. They wheeled me down to the surgery room. I remember how cold and bright it was. I never had major surgery before, so it was like, whoa, this is like a refrigerator. And then I slowly moved to the operating table. I crouched over and they gave me a spinal block, and then suddenly all of the pain went away, all of the pressure, the discomfort, so much relief washed over me. And I was like, I need one of these every day until I recover. This is so nice. I laid down on the table as they were like preparing everything. His heart rate monitor was beeping audibly, and suddenly I heard it slow way down. It was like noticeably slowing down, and there were some concerned comments. His heart rate had dropped to the 70s, and they tilted the table to try to change my position. They were just like kind of assessing the situation. Later, I think someone told me that I had been having a contraction on the table, although I couldn't feel it. It's possible that his blood supply was being compressed, or it could also have been a reaction to the anesthesia, because that can cause blood pressure to drop. Either way, the next few minutes were a blur. The nurse rushed over to the phone and picked it up, was like, hey, we need you in here right now. We're having heart decels. People rushed into the room. It was a flurry of activity. Questions were like being shouted back and forth. They whipped up the blue curtain in front of my face and they were shouting like protocol stuff. And I was just laying there like helplessly staring up at the ceiling like a starfish, just like, what's going on? The nurse came over, she reassured me, and she was like, we're gonna get him out. Everything's gonna be okay. Suddenly I felt a great pressure and my body was like shaking back and forth. I looked over at the door and Eric burst into the room. At that moment, he had been prepped for surgery and was waiting for the green light to come in. And they barely had time to alert him that this was actually going to be a stat C-section and that it was going to be much quicker than expected. So from the phone call to the time that they were pulling Ezra out was like probably 2 or 3 minutes. That's what it felt like, at least. It was so fast. It was crazy. And Eric was coming into the room as they were taking him out of me. And we heard his first cries, and we looked at each other in shock, like, what is going on? We were overwhelmed. Thankfully, he had good APGAR scores. He was normal and healthy, and they brought him over to us, and I looked at him. They like wiped him down and then laid him sort of on my chest, and I got to meet him and talk to him and kiss him, and it was just this wild moment where I was so overwhelmed, but it was so sweet. Eric also got to hold him, and then suddenly I was aware of the surgeon talking to me. She called out that she was noticing a large cyst on my ovary, and this was like very unexpected thing to be hearing. They had looked at my ovaries during my anatomy scan and had not seen anything, and suddenly I'm hearing that there is a large 6-centimeter cyst. At the time, they thought it was 5, but I believe it was 6 in the end, on my ovary. And she was saying, I don't think it's cancerous, but it looks like a dermoid. And, I'm palpating it, and it seems like there might be teeth or bones inside. And do you want us to cut into it and just see? This will turn into a different surgery right now. If you want us to remove it now, then you won't have to come and get it taken out later. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this was so overwhelming at the time. I was barely even following what was being said. I was actually falling asleep because I was so exhausted. I was struggling to keep my eyes open. And they actually took a picture of the cyst to show us, and it was huge. And they were asking basically, like, it was very a pressureful moment because we're there like just having met our baby, and then suddenly we're hearing this information and having to make a split-second decision and give informed consent for this thing that we barely understand. And only I could give consent. And Eric was very serious. He was like, do you understand what they're saying? They needed to know within a few minutes before they had to sew me back up because of the risk of infection and all this stuff. And I asked them to repeat it because I felt like I wasn't fully processing what was going on. I was like, can you say that again? What's going on? I was frozen, like I didn't know how to make the choice. And so since it wasn't an emergency, Eric in that moment, he just made the call and he said, I don't think she's lucid enough to give consent right now. She's not here fully. So let's just hold off. Let's just wait. Let's decline, which I think was the right move. Although, even though I did have to get it dealt with afterwards, I think that in that moment it was too much. And I think that it was right to be cautious and not just rush into anything. Finally, they handed me Ezra, And I held my little bundle in my arms as they wheeled me back to my room. And I felt like, oh, I have this surprise with me. My mom got to meet him. They weighed him, finally got to do skin to skin with him. It was so precious. So the next few days in recovery were challenging. That first night was long and blurry, and people were coming in constantly and waking me up and asking questions and doing tests, and it was really hard to sleep. Ezra was in the little bassinet, and when he would wake up and cry, Eric would bring him to me, and I was learning how to nurse for the first time and kind of crazy. But the next day was exciting. We had family members come to meet him for the first time. The adrenaline was still there, and it was like, oh my gosh, just so much joy. And there was lots of activity. I had to learn how to walk again, which was crazy because it's like suddenly I'm not pregnant and you have like a whole different center of gravity. And then you're also recovering from being paralyzed from the anesthesia and all this stuff. And so that was wild. I had my first shower, which was so therapeutic. And I washed off the blood and the residue from the surgery. And it occurred to me that it was the first time that I was away from my baby for the first time in 9 months because he was in the other room. And it was just this strange feeling of like, this presence has been with me for so long, and now I'm alone for the first time. And it's very trippy. Thursday, I crashed. The pediatricians were, in my opinion, overly concerned about his very mild bilirubin levels. He had mild jaundice, and they wanted to take him to phototherapy, which I didn't really agree with, but I was like too tired to argue, and I was kind of overwhelmed. So I was very emotional because I didn't want to be taken to the nursery, but it was right across the hall. Thankfully, I could go in there and hang out with him, and then they would bring him back to me every few hours so that I could nurse him. And so I just tried to use those few hours in between to just sleep, because at that point I was so exhausted. Eric started to get concerned about me because I would wake up and be anxiously trying to talk to him, but I was just saying gibberish. Like I was slurring my words. I wasn't making any sense. I was like full on delirious from the lack of sleep, from the extreme exertion, from the surgery, from the lack of food. I was like not doing well. And so Eric was like, you really need to just focus on sleeping. I was like, you're right. And so day 2 postpartum is like common for a hormone crash. And I really felt it. Like I was crying in front of so many people who came in, and I was like very fragile at that point. Everything was sort of starting to like settle over me, and just like the overwhelm of what I just experienced. My mom came back and was hanging out with us, brought food, helped me fix my crazy hair again, and I felt like there were many angels caring for me through the process, which helped so much. Finally, at the end of the day on Friday, a full week after we entered the hospital, we got to leave. They discharged us. Eric set up the car seat for the first time, and I sat next to Ezra in the back seat, and we drove home, and I cried. Our house had been lovingly cleaned and decorated by our family, and that made me so emotional too. I just felt so loved, and our community really stepped in for us, and it helped so much. Took another shower, and it like so therapeutic, so profound. Just the feeling of like looking at my body and everything I had been through, like the bruises, the blood, the surgical wound, and realizing what I would go through to bring my baby into the world. I just pondered about the sacrifice that motherhood brings, that it requires a kind of death. New life demands death of something. I was reminded of how Jesus laid down his life and his body for his children, and how it's such a gift to enter into that experience, to enter into that reality, to just taste a fraction of that suffering and realize how worth it all is. Afterwards, I laid down in bed, and I just had the strangest experience. Like I just stared up at the ceiling, and I felt the weight of everything that I had experienced that past week just crash over me, and I really felt like I was like floating above my body. It was so strange. I think I was just coming down from the shock of it all, like reintegrating back into my body. And I think that's the best way I could put it, is that I was like reintegrating back into my body after disassociating, kind of. So it was a significant moment. The next few weeks were a blur. They were slow and tender, and I had to work through my grief, and I had to process and let go of my dream and mourn the loss of what I had wanted. And of course, I have so much to be grateful for Like there are so many worse stories and so many worse outcomes, and God protected us, he kept us safe, and our health is such a blessing. But at times we all have to go through grappling with a reality that looks so much different than what we had anticipated, and that's really hard. Something that God has taught me is that when it comes to his children, he never allows the death of something without bringing new life to take its place, without bringing something better and more beautiful to replace it. Letting myself feel everything was a big part of my processing and healing. I would feel sad as I looked down at my baby and just apologize that I wasn't able to give him the entry into the world that I wanted to. I wasn't able to give him like this beautiful, gentle experience. I wanted to be the one to welcome him, to like hold him in my arms first. I didn't want him to go through a surgical birth. Like I knew there were benefits to natural birth, and that he wouldn't get those, or that his first moments in the world were, bright lights and strangers and being passed around, and obviously like those things, he's never going to remember those things, and ultimately it's not the most important, but it still was like little pieces of sadness that I had to work through and let go of. I felt betrayed by my body. Like I thought that I was made to do this, I gotten so close to my goal, and then I wasn't able to finish the job. I felt like the significance of my wound, of my abdominal, my surgical wound, and the feeling that like 7 layers of tissue were cut through, and like my body would never be the same, and that scar will be with me forever, and maybe it could affect my future births. All of these things, I had to feel them all. I think all of this kind of affected my bonding with Ezra a little bit at first, just because I was like still reeling, I had questioning myself, like, could I have done something differently? Should I have made a different choice? Did I do the right thing? If I just kept pushing a little longer, could I have done it? I really experienced that feeling of self-doubt of like, could I have just done it if I just kept trying, And I asked one of the doctors why she thought my baby hadn't kept ascending. And she said, like the cord looked like a normal length. It was wrapped around his neck, but, nuchal cords are common. Ultimately, she didn't really know what to say, but she said, well, maybe your pelvis is too small. And that offhand comment got to me, in such a vulnerable state. We're so open and so, just vulnerable to comments, and like they can really eat away at us. And that caused me to feel, again, betrayed by my body, or like doubtful about my body. And although I'm sure she didn't intend to, at least temporarily, that comment instilled a feeling of doubt in my body. And this is a common suggestion that doctors will make when they're not really sure what else to say. And it's interesting because, as my midwife said, it often ends up that they blame the mother's body rather than, well, maybe your baby wasn't in the optimal position, or, maybe your body wasn't ready to go into labor. Maybe these other reasons, it often somehow is pointed to, well, maybe your body just isn't the right shape or something, which it can happen. There can be pelvic abnormalities, but those are relatively rare. And for the most part, our bodies don't grow babies that they won't be able to birth. So the truth is, it could be a combination of things. Like I was eaten up for a little while with a desire to understand, like, why, what went wrong, what should I have done differently, like what can I know for next time. But it's likely a combination of things like induction, even medically necessary induction, that can cause a rippling cascade of interventions, as it did in my case. My body wasn't ready, and was forced to start the process early. It was a long process with lack of adequate sleep and food, and it's possible that Ezra was still too high up, that I started pushing too soon and exhausted myself. There may have been like some pelvic floor tension that was holding him back, positional imbalances that made it hard for him to descend. But whatever the case, we can never know all of the what ifs. God protected Ezra's and my safety. And he even used the C-section to reveal the presence of this cyst that we had no idea was there, and that we never would have known about if I hadn't gotten the surgery. But even deeper than all this, he used this process to refine me, to teach me, to prepare me for motherhood, for the lack of control that I need to learn that I have over my life. In this experience, God stripped away all these things that I was holding on to and asked, will you still trust me? I have more empathy and compassion for mothers and their experiences now because of this. And I understand hospitals and health challenges in a deeper way that I didn't before. I had to release any idolatry or like my vision of having a perfect home birth or anything like that. I had to just let go of that. Even like relying on my own research and understanding and preparation and all of that. I just had to let all of that go. God took it all away and lovingly walked me right through the center of what I had been most afraid of. He took me right through the valley of the shadow of death, right? The thing that I wanted least of all, he took me right through it and he held my hand the whole way. And he made me stronger for it. As time went on, I talked about this story more and more to others. And the more I talked about it, the more I was able to process it and the more I was able to integrate it. And it became easier to deal with. Verbally processing, I think, was really helpful for me. And it helped me to be able to just be heard and encouraged by other people and reminded me that we're meant to go through life in community with others. And my doula was encouraging me that she could feel the Holy Spirit's presence in this birth. And even one of the things was that she never had a mom be ready to talk about her birth story so soon after, because it was like immediately pretty much like I was able to talk about it with everyone and share with my family. And she was saying like that was very quick that you were able to start talking about it. And I think that was, again, just God's protection. Like, although it was a traumatic experience, I didn't have to have lasting trauma and fear, and like it didn't have to take root so deep in my heart and like have a hold over me. I feel like God was able to release me bit by bit and take me through the grieving process without holding on to that trauma, you know? So that's my story. As I said, like it's been a little over a year since then. And as I mentioned, I was in school. I was also co-authoring a book at the time, which if you want to learn more about, you can look in the description. So postpartum, I was like focused on healing for a few weeks, and then I had to jump into my schoolwork again and try to catch up, which was like a sprint to not fail my classes. Some days I just sat at my desk with Ezra on my chest and worked from waking to sleeping. It was like survival mode for a while. So that was crazy. And then in February this year, about 4 months after I gave birth, I had my surgery laparoscopically to remove the cyst. And so they took that out and it went well. And yes, it was a dermoid cyst. So look that up if you're interested. It's a very strange thing. But it was pretty large. And so it was good that it was removed. Not long after that, Eric got seriously ill with valley fever, and we experienced an incredibly hard time. We are self-employed, and so our business came to a standstill, and we felt completely overwhelmed, you know, new parents just like struggling to make it through. And yet somehow God brought us here, and it feels like we are coming out of a really hard season. Although it's been such a gift and such a joy to experience our baby and get to become parents together. It's been the sweetest thing. But, you know, there's been so much uncertainty and so much slogging through really hard times, you know, health crises and extended illnesses and slow recoveries and financial hurdles and medical bills and career disappointments and heavy workloads and setbacks. And it's just been a lot, but God has been there with us through it all. He's been so faithful. He's provided. And I can say that with absolute conviction and certainty. He's provided for us miraculously, and I know that he always will. Baby! I'm finishing up right now. Hi, boo-boo. Oh, hello. Hello. Oh, you see the light? Is that cool? This experience has shaped us. It has helped me become a better mother and more of the person that I was made to be. And I want to share that months after he was born, I remembered a moment I had the previous year where God had spoken to me, and I pulled out my journal and checked, and I had written it down. This was June 25th, 2023. 7 months before we even conceived. My journal entry read, I had a sense that there might be a challenge or uncertainty during pregnancy that I can't do anything about, and I'm going to have to trust the Lord to work, not me. I have a feeling that learning to surrender will be a significant lesson for me in all of this. It's something I really struggle with, letting go of control and trusting you completely. Grow my faith, Lord. Well, he answered. He grew my faith and he was preparing me for all of this and what would happen. It's such a wild experience looking back at the chapters of your life and just having 2020 vision and seeing how it all wove together, the craziest things, and yet somehow God is making a beautiful tapestry of it. And in a moment where I was sharing my sadness with God, I felt so comforted as the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, essentially, he said, of course, I wanted you to have the experience that you dreamed of. Of course, I created birth. Of course, I wanted you to experience that and to have a beautiful birth. Of course, I wanted that for you. But there are things more important than your happiness, and you have to trust me. And it was just this reminder that, like, Jesus grieves with us when we are grieved. He understands everything that we go through, and he wants the best for us. But sometimes that doesn't mean what makes us the happiest, right? Sometimes the best is something that hurts in the moment, and then we get through it and we realize that's exactly what we needed. And I just know that that's what he did in my life. Finally, I want to just share a quote with you from a Facebook group that I'm in. Like, I think it's like a VBAC group or some Facebook group, and I don't remember who wrote this, but it brought so much peace to my heart. So I know that no matter what the future holds or future pregnancies, there's a high risk of developing ICP again, and I know miracles are possible, and it's maybe I won't experience it or maybe I will, and no matter what, I'm just gonna have to take it as it comes, and just trust the Lord again, with whatever happens in the future. But I thought this quote really encapsulated what I felt. There's a small piece of my mama heart that will always wonder and maybe grieve a little that I wasn't able to birth any of my babies the way I know God designed my body to. But I also know that our love and sacrifices as mothers is not diminished or magnified by how we birth our babies. I have 4 beautiful children that I brought into the world in the safest and best way that I knew how, given the circumstances and the information I had. I'm so thankful for the gift it has been to bring new life into the world, regardless of how it happened. So I hope my story makes you feel seen and that you feel encouraged, whether you have experienced something similar with your birth or just are learning how to surrender or are dealing with a traumatic event. I just want to encourage you that Jesus isn't done with your story and that he makes beautiful things out of the ashes. No matter what you've had to let go of, just trust him and watch as he brings more joy, more peace, more of himself to fill and replace whatever was lost. And it's going to be so much better than you think. Every painful step is worth it as it brings us closer to our Savior. If you found this encouraging, if you relate, if you want to share some of your story, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you and just hear how this impacted you or what it spoke to you. And let me know if you want more content around this kind of thing, birth, motherhood, all of that. I'm really happy to share about this as I'm so passionate about it, and it's a journey that I'm now on with you. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video and appreciated the story. I hope that it was a blessing to you, and keep an eye out for more videos coming soon. I have a lot of ideas, so just let me know what you would like to see next. So thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.